at Wentworth Falls. And we just took a break then while the leaf blower next door finished its job. Now let's go back to Terry. So now that the machine has died down, here I'm standing in front of the most abundant rhubarb.
Yes, we love the rhubarb and apple, and I believe it's quite good for you. And the story with that is when we bought this house, it's the only house I've ever heard of that had rhubarb mentioned on the housing contract. The people before us, they were only here for a few years, had inherited rhubarb plants, and we weren't allowed to have it, so I had to get our own. And it's
so what, that was in the contract?
It was in the contract.
That they would take the rhubarb with them?
They would take the rhubarb. It didn't include in the price of the house. I always think that's quite cute. And the original rhubarb I planted, I gave some pieces to another neighbour, because we have a lot of gardens around here. And then the year after, all my rhubarb died, so I've had to replant it again. And it's
very, very lush.
Yeah, we're getting quite a few pickings.
Very thick. And do you just let your rhubarb do its own thing? Or do you transplant that?
I do divide them if they get too large, but they love being fed, plenty of manure, plenty of water. So they're very heavy feeders.
Yeah, they've got very big leaves and very thick stalks.
Yeah. I think they like the roses too, Suzanne. I don't know why, but they seem to like them.
Well, there's a big thing in companion planting. I try to do companion planting with my vegetables and herbs. But, you know, it's no doubt the same sort of thing with flowers.
It is, yeah.
That certain flowers like to be with, or plants like to be with other plants.
Yeah. They're very sociable.
And this is a beautiful grass here. This is a lovely feathery grass, about 1.5 metres tall. There's little seeds flying off in... I hope I'm not spreading weeds. And what's this beautiful grass?
It's a structural grass that won't spread. We got that down at a garden trip that we often go around and look at other gardens, and this was in part of the nursery. And I'd seen a lot of the English garden programs that I watch have exotics and grasses combined, and it just gives you that texture, and when the wind's blowing, as you see, it's been got damaged the other day.
It's beautiful.
I think we were mentioning soft about the lilies that got flattened.
Yes, come back to the lilies. Tell me what happened to the lilies on that wild wintry day a couple of weeks ago.
Well, it was Sunday, and the heat and the wind, they came out, and 100 lilium bulbs were just flattened to the ground, so I had to devise a way of staking them and putting a trellis in and tying them up, and they'll be okay now. Otherwise they would have just become snail bait, and so snow would have loved them then.
So those liliums are a deep maroon colour, the ones in the background, and the ones in the foreground are yellow with a deep maroon centre.
And the orange one down there, tiger lily.
And they look as if they're almost 1 metre high, but with about 10 flowers on each stalk. Just a single stalk with 10 flowers. Mine only give me 1 or 2, maybe, if I'm lucky.
It's quite unusual. This is a Sterile Agapanthus, and it gets almost black flowers, so they're no problem up here. They don't spread, and they're very, very exotic too, so they'll be coming up.
Well, the Agra Panthers are another plant that are bushfire resistant.
Oh, that's interesting.
And it's a shame that they spread into the bush up here, because they're one of the plants that are good for, you know, people listening. Don't plant Agapanthus unless you can get hold of this one, which is sterile, but then it wouldn't spread, would it?
No, it wouldn't spread at all.
So when you bought this, I'm looking at this Sterile Agapanthus, it's about to have a flower. How big a plant was it? Does it just
it was only a tiny one, and it's taken... It used to be planted up in the front garden, which was all full of Agapanthus, and we removed them. And so we could plant our tulips. So I knew that was unusual, and wanted to keep it. So we transplanted it to this garden.
I'd like to come back and take a photo of it. Let's see this black.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So here we're walking now past in front of the liliums, and I'm always so envious of a garden with very few weeds. Is this because it's so densely planted?
It is, because I don't give any weeds any room to grow. It's I like spreading plants, and plants that will trail and it just keeps
And
the weeds
spread.
out.
Yeah.
And the good things you want to grow and vice versa.
So these heliotropes?
They're aqualegias or granny's
Aqualegias.
bonnets. They are beautiful. They're blue.
And it looks as if you cut off the flowering heads, have you? Do you deadhead them?
I do after the seed spreads, because there'll be a whole new crop of them coming up.
So you
next
wait
year.
till the seed to spread, you let the flower.
Yeah, I try and keep things going for a second and third year. Like on our borders where the tulips are, I have polyanthus, and I dig them up when I'm digging up the tulips, and plant them in the shade, and I get 2 and 3 years out of them. So it's very economical.
Very beautiful too, very colourful, aren't they, the polyanthus?
They're lovely. So you don't have to spend a fortune once you establish your garden.
And so in the background there you've got a solar waterfall.
Yes, that was given to me as a birthday present. I thought, oh, that's a funny thing, but I love it now, and the birds certainly do too. The little birds like to come down there, whereas the big ones, the big bowerbirds, they splash around like chooks down the back.
Right. Okay, and then what have we got over here?
Lilies again, and fuchsias, and these are calla lilies coming up, and more dahlias. These are wonderful. Hercuras, they give you a lot of colour, and they're quite, you get a simple flower off them.
And here, everything seems so lush, and so in keeping it lush, how often would you give it a dose of cow manure or a dose of...
I like to keep giving them fortnightly a fish emulsion food.
As a liquid?
Food, as a liquid.
So do you come around with a watering can, or do you do it through the hose?
I do a watering can. I find better.
Right.
Because you can direct it more, and you can have it at the right concentration that you want.
Right. Because it's so incredibly lush. And then how often would you water?
Well,
Because I
especially
suppose
in
that
this
depends on
weather,
the season, doesn't it?
Yes, I'll be out watering well this afternoon because it's a hot day. But if we have rain in between, twice a week.
Okay, not all that much.
Yeah.
And then, so this is the part of the garden that you've had tailored.
Because it was quite a bit of a problematic area and used to collect the rain and the water. There was no garden here with this cool, or I call it the damp garden or water garden. There was nothing here at all. So I did put in the fount or urn, which is the water feature in it, and then gradually all the plants that love damp, like the hostas, like the hellebore.
So how does the damp spread from your water feature?
Well, it doesn't. I just keep it very, very damp, and the shade, because there's no evaporation, because we're covered with this huge cedar.
And for a lot of gardens, this would be a problem, but you've really used the fact that it's got its shade and it's created this beautiful tropical rainforest, really.
Yes, it's part of history, this, and I mean that is probably well over 100 years old, and I think it would be a crime that too many of them are being cut down. And the original European settlers came up here and established these sort of gardens because as memories from home. So I guess that's what I like.
I think they might have overdone the pine trees.
Yes.
In the Blue Mountains.
There are a lot of them.
Well, we've been house hunting for my daughter of late, and I saw one house that was just so fabulous for her, but they'd planted 20 pine trees, big pine trees to the north, and another 20 to the west, which had obviously grown bigger than they thought, and there wasn't a skerrick of sun getting into the house.
That's
Not a skerrick.
That's too much.
Yeah.
No, at least ours, we do get enough sun, and there's a pine tree in the place next to us. So it's obviously that somebody had planted quite a few.
Right, okay. This here, what's that called?
That is a variegated, Sorry, it's just gone out of my head.
But it's a very popular tree in the mountains, and I don't know that I've seen it quite so high and dense.
There's about 4 of them under there.
Right.
Oh gosh, it'll probably come to me later.
As we wander around. So now here we're coming into, again, the round garden.
The round garden,
where you've got
Circle of Life.
This is the Circle of Life. Yes, we're doing the Circle of Life, aren't we?
We've got a lilac that was here, which is absolutely beautiful in spring, covered in lovely lilac blossom.
Fragrant?
Very fragrant.
Beautiful.
And it fits in well with this garden. This is more of like a sculpture garden, for want of a better word, with the hourglass and the fountain and the urn and that. And it's probably the most formal part of the garden, but not that any part of it's really formal.
Well, it's appropriate that in the formal part of the garden you've got the wedding.
Yes, that is. Yes, I never thought of that.
That's a very formal thing.
That is a very formal thing.
And here you've got a number of beautiful pots, including the pots with your bonsai. So I'm sorry to ask you to describe them again to me, but describe this bonsais.
This one came up in that pot over there, the urn pot, and it was a little tiny seedling. And I had done some bonsai previously. I did a course many years ago with a bonsai master called Len Webber, and I only did it was an amateur course, but I was so impressed by it. I did used to do more of it, so I've started again. Not that I'll be around to sort of see the result of the very old ones, but I just love doing it, and doing it this way, I get the enjoyment out of it now. And I've got my classroom assignment, which was
that was a classroom assignment.
Yeah, that was a classroom assignment.
Okay.
So we went to Epping High School, I think, and he showed us how to wire these onto rock. There's a rock under that, and they grow over the rock.
And so was it a cutting or was it already a plant with roots?
It's a tiny little seedling.
Okay.
And I wanted it so that it would develop. It almost looks like an animal.
It does, with the front legs and the back legs.
Yeah.
So this is about 1/2 metre tall in a very small pot, which would only be 10, 15, 20 centimetres wide.
Yeah.
And it's 40 years old.
That's right, and I thought I nearly lost it this year. I pruned it very drastically because it had got a bit out of hand. I left it there, and it's been there for about 4 months now. And I thought, everything has a life cycle, but now it's shooting again. It's just so
Trees are incredibly resilient, aren't they?
It amazes me.
When you see the bush fighting back after the bushfires, how with such devastation there's still these green shoots coming out of the trees.
It's miraculous, yeah.
And then this is another beautiful bonsai. Yeah. This one's about almost 1 metre tall, and it wraps around a rock. Yeah. Are they the roots around the rock?
Yes, they're the roots around the rock, and the main taproot would be under the soil. And a friend gave me this one because he knew I would look after it, and it's pruning that back now. And it's when I got it, it had fly wire and all sorts of stuff holding it on, so I've moved that, and now it looks much more natural. I would call that Indiana Jones.
Now with a bonsai, they've always worried me. I've never been game enough to look after a bonsai because it's years, up to hundreds of years, and can you leave them go away on holidays? Like a cat? Is it the same sort of issue?
Yeah, if you put them in a dish of water, I mean, if it's a very, very dry part, I usually get someone to just water them. But no, they're fairly flexible, and you can treat them as long as you know what you're doing, fairly roughly. As well as pruning the tops, you have to prune the roots too, otherwise you'll...
So do you lift it out?
Yes, you lift it entirely out, get a little, I've got a miniature garden tool set, scrape the roots around and replace it with nice fresh soil. And
because this would be quite heavy, with a heavy rock to lift out.
I don't think I can do that one, Suzanne, because I think the rock is actually fastened to the pot somehow. But what I do is to dig the soil out around the roots, and then top it up with.
And you snip the roots?
Not on that, no, I haven't, because I think it's probably the aerial roots keep it going.
Right.
And
And here we've got hellebores around this